Good morning, I'm Dennis Weiss for Eagle Communications. Welcome to our town. Now our town today is a little different town. We're in a different Eagle town. We're in Hutchinson, Kansas. And we're here because our town news today is Tim Huelskamp. This is as close as you could come to the Eisenhower Presidential Library today.
Well, today anyway.
Today,
so I've been there
right?
at the Eisenhower Library many times.
We filmed this program a number of times there, and that was obviously both our preferences to be able to sit in the home of Dwight David Eisenhower and talk about Kansas.
Yeah.
But today we're in Hutchinson because that's where you and I could meet.
Absolutely, pleasure to be here. But
Welcome to Eagle.
Pleasure to be with you, and I'd talk about Dwight D. Eisenhower any day, because he is such what it means to be a Kansan.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks don't recognize he comes right from the big 1st District of Kansas. So.
And what it means to be a leader.
Absolutely.
Dwight David Eisenhower.
Yeah, in all ways, and with his last leadership in politics, but the most important leadership in my mind was long before then in World War II, doing what he did and led us through a tremendous crisis in our country and crisis in the world.
You know, we've had a lot of opportunity in Abilene to enjoy the legacy of Eisenhower, but it's a gift that never stops giving. You know, we recently had a D-Day celebration. We're sitting here at the end of June. Well, on 6th of June, we had a D-Day celebration. And I've sat with Carl Weisenbach often there at the library, and we talked about, I've always said there's two decisions I don't believe at a point in time that any other man alive would have made the way they were made. And one is D-Day, and the second one is the note he sent to the administration saying we have to do something about the displaced persons in Europe at the conclusion of the European theater of war. Yeah. I don't think there was anybody else in the military or any other place in time of warfare, a man who would have been capable of making those decisions.
I agree. Tremendous. And that's what we find out, whether in Washington, local politics, or in your own life, is there are places in time, I believe, we're pushed and set and to do the right thing. And Dwight D. Eisenhower, tremendous leader and recognized, and I mean, he wasn't incredibly sophisticated in the ways of the world, but he knew what the right thing was to do, well trained, and he went out and did his job and made the right calls, and it's a tremendous legacy.
You know, I've had you on camera a number of times, and I think this is the first time you ever walked in a room without a chart. But I guess I want to ask you, I could sit here and do this interview by myself, I think, because Tim Huelskamp has always said the same thing to me.
Yeah.
You've always been, when you said you were going to Washington, and then when we've talked after you've been there a while, you always talk about the burden of the national debt on us and the future generations. I think you've talked about the fact that American veterans deserve better. You've talked about the fact that there are principles that we as individuals are free to hold in America that are important to be represented by government. Never heard you waver from that.
Well, I think it's an issue of integrity, and you say what you're going to do and you go and do it. I think Kansans do that in their daily life, and sometimes we fall short in the things we aim at. But in Washington, we got to follow the Constitution. We got to follow our conservative principles. That's what built this nation. That's what drove folks like President Eisenhower, and what drives our economy, drives our small businesses. At the end of the day, many of the problems that we have in America are not going to be solved by some bureaucrats or politicians in Washington, but they will be solved by more liberty and freedom. And we've got a $20 trillion in debt. And I've seen folks in both parties, and that's where sometimes I get in trouble. It's not just a Democrat issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's an American issue. And if you look at my voting record, I say there's things we need to reduce. And actually, Dwight D. Eisenhower is a great example of things he said, you know what, we've got to reduce spending in certain areas and get a budget in balance. And but I fear for the future of our nation. We have $20 trillion of debt. I fear for our nation when we have a healthcare system that's been split apart by Obamacare. I've got 70 community hospitals across the big 1st District, and many of them are struggling. Struggling for a number of reasons, but particularly because of the threats from Obamacare and the threats to Medicare because of Obamacare. So, but the key to doing the right thing in Washington is knowing what you're about, and I believe in conservative principles. I believe in life and liberty, and that freedom starts at home, and then we follow that Constitution, and that's the way it should be. But you mentioned veterans as well. That's one way where Washington promised all these things to our men and women in uniform and then fell. Flat on our faces, doing the right thing. So I've had the incredible opportunity, growing up in a small town of 500 people, I never thought I'd ever have an opportunity to look a VA secretary right in the eye and say, hey, you failed our veterans. And I've done that to 2 or 3 of them. Yeah. But I think we made progress there. So whether you're in Abilene or whether you're in Garden City or whether you're in Colby, now you have a choice because it's up my health pass. You get to go to your local hospital and make that choice. So, and we count it one veteran at a time, but with the VA Choice Program, I help write and pass 14,000 times now. Kansas veterans have made a choice to get their health care closer to home. I think that's great, and we need to continue to improve on that. But there's a lot of work left to do on that issue, clearly.
You consider yourself a principled person?
I do.
Yes. Many of the things you stand for go clearly down principle ideological lines? Yes?
Absolutely.
There are some costs to that, are there not?
There are, and my dad always said, call a spade a spade. Mm-hmm. And you know, if it's, for instance, radical Islamic terrorism, you call it. And I think we have folks in the White House and plenty of people in Washington, both parties, don't want to call the truth out. And so, you know, I think Washington has too much of our money already. We don't need higher taxes. I think they have borrowed too much money, and we need to balance our budget. But when I told the Republican Speaker of the House that and voted counter to what he demanded I do, you know, I got kicked off the Ag Committee. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's I told the Speaker, I don't work for John Boehner, and I told him very respectfully, Dennis, and I said, you know, if you're going to punish the 1st District of Kansas, that's a mistake. And so, but what I'm happy to report now is John Boehner is gone. We have a new speaker, Paul Ryan, who's respectful, and I will be back on the Ag Committee. I know that because I'm on the steering committee that makes those decisions, but to me that's a good sign of change in Washington. We have a long ways to go, but whether it's Nancy Pelosi or a John Boehner or Barack Obama or pick your president, I don't work for any of those. I work for the people of Kansas. That's why I've conducted 372 town halls, and you've been at a number of those. Just sit there and listen and take their questions and concerns and take them back to the folks in Washington, because I am the only member of Congress right now they've got. You know, they got 2 U.S. senators, but one voice in the U.S. House. And as a 5th-generation farmer, I've got a great opportunity to stand up and say, as a farmer, I've been working on some ag issues, and that's pretty exciting, some opportunities we've had in the last 5 years.
You've sat with me before, so you're probably used to this, but I'm a taxpayer too. This is our town. That's yours and mine, our, and all the people behind the lens. It's our town. It's our taxes that we send up for people like you to manage carefully. I take this passionately on this value of this program to change what happens in our world, okay? So, principal man takes a stand, you get kicked off the Ag Committee. My personal view of that, if you had been on the Flowers and Decorations Committee, you'd have got kicked off of that. I've told several people who asked me about this thing, I said, all I can do is say about me. I think if I had been that guy instead of Tim Huelskamp, they probably would have kicked me off of more than the committee. They probably would have thrown me out of town. So, so my question for you is, did you do what you say you were going to do when you went to Washington?
I have, Dennis, and there's a local newspaper that's not very friendly to me or any other conservative. They're pretty liberal. They wrote an editorial a couple of years ago that says, oh shucks, darn, Tim Huelskamp is doing everything he promised to do. I said I was going to fight for life. I was going to fight to reduce the power and control of Washington on our lives, fight for more liberty and freedom, protect our Second Amendment rights, protect life, and try to figure out this problem of too much government, too high of taxes. And so, yeah, I was punished for doing the right thing. And I think for many of my constituents are saying, Tim, we didn't send you up there to do what somebody else told you to do. I've got my voting card right here in my wallet, Dennis, and like I told the Speaker, that's not your voting card. It's actually not mine. It's the people of the 1st District of Kansas, and that's why I go back and forth every week. I know a lot of Washington insiders live up there. You know, they spend all their time up there. Their kids go to school up there. You know, my heart, my home, my farm and family's right here in Kansas. And I wish I could be out cutting wheat most days. And
so do I.
That's not possible with this job. But that's what I think about every day. You know, and I was just at the farm a couple days ago, and you know, my 9-year-old, he said, "Gosh, Dad, you sure miss not being on the farm every day." And I sure do. But I have a great opportunity just to be an advocate for Kansas farmers. You know, I grew up on a farm. I always thought we seemed to work extra hard, didn't get anywhere other than the farm and work and work, you know, and then to see here, take that experience and be able to tell a congressman, you know, on GMO issues, say, you know what, we use those on our farm. You know, if you want to, you know, for instance, if you want to help raise farm income and increase the price of wheat, corn, cattle, we got to sell more around the world. And so I had the incredible opportunity to meet with ambassadors from 4 different countries, you know, Taiwan, Vietnam, Cuba and Japan. And actually, I sat down with the Taiwanese ambassador, and we signed a trade agreement, which should be negotiated, but we continue to do that because they're good partners. And just as a fifth-generation farmer or farm kid from a little town of Fowler, Kansas, able to sit there and say, hey, we've got great things to sell here and open them up. I mean, that's just an amazing opportunity. I think it's a testament to the system, testament to our way of government that, you know, the big cities don't run everything. They got a lot of votes in Congress, but a man from a rural town, rural Americans can stand up and say, hey, we're going to fix the VA. Hey, Mr. President, you're wrong on this. And Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, you've got to open up this body and give us a chance to solve our problems.
You and I talked off camera one time after one of these interviews, and I said, will price supports or grain owned by the government in bins to buffer pricing ever come back? You said, no, no way. It's a different product for a different time, and that crop insurance is really the thing that will work for modern farming. That's largely what we see in what we know as a farm bill.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question that I have some points of view on, but I want you to answer it. I remember looking up a number, and it's somewhere that the agricultural part of the farm bill is under 30%, more 25% or something like that, and the remaining balance are food assistance programs and welfare kinds of programs. I also looked, and you know, the political argument was for that as well. We have to get the votes from the city people somehow for the ag program. I have to tell you, I just recoil from that.
Yeah.
If we can't argue the value of a safe food supply.
Yeah, we got to be able to make that argument. And you know, when they put them together, you know, back.
How are you ever voting for a farm bill? Is my question. I guess.
And for media in Washington and media across Kansas, I keep telling them it's not a. Let's be clear on this. It's really a food stamp bill these days.
That's my opinion.
80% of it is food stamps. 20% is farming, and you cut the 20% apart. 10% is conservation, and 10% are these as well. So the last farm bill that passed, you know, Senator Roberts, chairman of the Ag Committee, who's endorsed me, Pat voted against it, and every member of the delegation from Kansas voted against it. Senator Moran voted for it, and I understand that. But the three top priorities for me in the farm bill are crop insurance, crop insurance, crop insurance. But also, if we're going to get our $20 trillion of debt under control, we've got to deal with food stamps.
How do we ever do that and have a progressive farm bill at the same time? How do I ever expect you to advocate for me in agriculture when 80% of your voting record on a farm bill has nothing to do with farming? How do I hold you accountable for that?
And that's what we're talking about as we move forward on the next farm bill. You know, I will be on the House Ag Committee. Pat Roberts will be hopefully still the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee if elections go right, and we're going to start in the spring looking at that. But what I want to see on the farm bill portion of that is we're going to simplify that. You know, to provide more flexibility to farmers. There are a lot of folks who are looking at the farm bill that passed a few years ago and said, gosh, that didn't simplify much at all. You know, and we definitely don't want to go back to the days of set-asides where you had to set up, you know, 12 acres here, 18 here, and it was just a mess. And for folks that were not in farming, they just don't get that. But at the end of the day, to me, if farmers are going to increase our income and increase our prosperity, it's all about all the customers outside this country, which is why I've been working hard with other countries to promote trade and agriculture and say, hey, Japan, buy our beef. You know, if we're going to buy your pickup trucks, you should be buying our beef and give us a fair shot at that. You should buy our wheat. You know, incredible taxes and tariffs on our wheat products, and we don't do it to their trucks, and that's just unfair. And same thing with Vietnam, same thing as well. So, but a lot of agreements are going on now. I think there's tremendous opportunity because at the end of the day, I just don't think we're bragging just as Kansas farmers. At the end of the day, we're the most productive farmers in the whole world. So give us a shot at these markets, and we're going to increase our incomes because 95% of our customers are outside this country. And we've got to feed the world, and we're going to continue to do that. There's a growing and hungry world, as Senator Roberts always says, and we're going to feed them.
That's well said. I have an 86-year-old uncle I told you about in New York who's still on the farm, and I'm going to see him on the next weekend in July after the 4th of July. I'm so excited to do that. I'd like to take credit for this, but it's his thought. We're talking about ag. Dennis, the last time I looked on CNN, the world is hungry.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we, I'm a sales guy, so how do we bridge that gap through government to understand this is a sales opportunity for the rest of the world, and leveling that playing field will mean success or failure?
Oh, absolutely. And I've been doing a little reading in the last few weeks about some of the older ag policies. I mean, in the late 70s, early 80s, they decided they'd use food as a weapon. You know, no, it's a way to not only make it profitable, but it is a way to stabilize the world. Because if you're hungry, you're protesting and trying to take down the government. So I think it's critical. We got to help feed the world, and we can do it. And again, I have a colleague of mine in another business. He happens to be in the textile business, and he said, "Well, I don't need trade." I said, "Well, I understand that, but we can compete." We are so successful, so productive in Kansas agriculture and across the country that we are the most efficient and the best provider of so many of these things. So give us a fair, open shot. We're going to go at them. I think I'm like most Kansas farmers that I'd much rather worry about what the market wants than rather what Uncle Sam wants.
One topic you've always spoke about that I didn't put in my first list is regulation, over-regulation, and I come from southwest Colorado. And in one of the larger counties of Colorado, and I don't think there's ever been more than 1,200 people in the entire county,
wow.
Dolores County, Colorado. Within that county of Colorado, it sits on the southern end of the shale bonanza that has been undeveloped, sits on unbelievable amounts of natural gas, and provided most of the uranium for America's nuclear projects from the 50s on.
Oh, wow.
That industry sits vacant as well. Of the three, no shale is being developed in that county. Very little gas because of the Canyon Monument of the Ancients that President Clinton put into effect. And obviously the nuclear programs, no nuclear sites being built to generate power in America today. That one county probably holds enough energy for all of your kids and mine's future life. How do we get through the regulation barriers and put up a much needed power plant in southwest Kansas and develop southwest Colorado's energy that's cheap and available?
Oh, for decades we've been trying to expand the Sunflower power plant, and 10 years ago said, okay, it's time to do that. They had been planning on it since 1981, and all of a sudden the government changed the rules and said, you know, we don't want coal anymore, or we don't want nuclear anymore, or we don't want farmers to farm their land anymore, or now we're going to regulate every drop of water. And here's what Congress can do about it. Here's what I've been able to do about it, is stand up and take away the money for these agencies. If you're the EPA and you want to regulate every last drop of water, shame on you. Do your job. And your job is not to worry about a dry road ditch in western Kansas. And so Congress can go in, and we have in the House. They did in the Senate, and the president vetoed it and said no more money for the Waters of the U.S. rule. You know, and some very specific issues is this Endangered Species Act. You know, we passed a number of reforms to that through the House. Didn't make it through the Senate, but on this listing of the lesser prairie chicken is just a pretty clear example where somebody in Washington, D.C., an environmental group, sued the agency at a request and decided, you know, there's a little bird out there, we're going to put him on a list, which would dramatically change whether we can drill for oil, drill for gas, use our pastures, actually use our croplands. And for 5 or 6 years we begged them, my 5 years of do not list the bird. And actually 3 or 4 years, but this was started right before I came into office. So we pushed back, and finally, through pressure on the floor, pressure through the courts, pressure working together with colleagues in Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, they finally took the bird off the list, which is unprecedented. Recognize, you know what? You know, the reason the bird, lesser prairie chicken, was having problems because we're in the middle of a drought. I remember I sat down with the director of the agency and I said, sir, with all due respect, if it doesn't rain, we're not going to have any birds.
Let me ask you a hard question.
Yeah.
What kind of respect is due somebody that can't understand that?
Well, that's basic biology. I mean, but if the agencies are driven by ideology rather than biology and common sense, but that's Congress's job to come in and whack an agency and say, hey, you know, that doesn't make any sense. So thank goodness, hopefully the drought's over. There's still some pockets of it, but now the bird's recovering despite government and not because of it.
I just had a semi-intelligent thought, I think. So we're $20 million in debt, right?
Trillion.
Yes, excuse me. 20 trillion in debt. How much complication can be built with $20 trillion of debt?
Oh, yeah.
It's tied together. I've listened to you talk about the listing of the lesser prairie chicken. Oh, and by the way, you know what they're called in southwest Kansas? It's a Gunnison sage grouse. Same bird, same problem, same restrictions.
Yeah.
This is real. I think people You know, you live in Fowler, I live in Abilene. I want people on TV, on the internet to understand this isn't coming from CNN and someplace else. This is coming from here, where we live, with two people who live on the ground that this affects.
Yeah. And that's a basic principle and philosophy I have, Dennis, and folks might disagree on it, but I think the folks that own the land, you know, that plan to live there for generations to come, I think we're basically the first ones and the last ones to care about our environment. And this idea that somebody in Washington, D.C. and a bureaucrat who's never been to Western Kansas and frankly doesn't want to come to visit us and we'd rather them stay away, they're going to come and tell us they know better. You know, and we have to worry about that. And I have to worry about the water supply on our farm, you know, and the things we use. You know, why would we use chemicals and herbicides, GMO stuff that's going to ruin our environment? We're going to be living there. And so we do that in an environmentally safe manner. I mean, we actually reduced our number of herbicides we've used. Our protection's going up. It's a tremendous technological revolution going on in agriculture that folks on CNN never talk about.
Yeah.
But I will say that's what I talk about in Washington. That's part of the things you don't see in the job description. But I stand up and says I'm an ambassador for not only just Kansas farmers and ranchers, but for how we take care of the environment. So it's a great story. And growing up on a farm, I just, again, never thought I'd ever have an opportunity to stand up on the floor of the House and say, hey, this is what we're doing. And this is why I'm so proud of what we're doing. And there's things that would just amaze you. And so, but I always talk about one of the most compact congressional districts in this country is somewhere in New York City. And I say, you know, they've got about 700,000 folks in this district. And the district is the size of a little bit larger than the average large farm in western Kansas. But they got 700,000 people. You know, they can't walk down the street with running out to you. And we've got 700,000 people over 2/3 of Kansas. And so it's hard to communicate to them and say, what's the difference? And what I say is, you know, we'll try to show you what it's like, but all we're asking for you is let us take care of ourselves. You know, let us take care of our schools ourselves. You know, education is a perfect example where folks in Washington want to tell us what to do. So I said, let's get rid of Common Core, no child left behind, and say, hey, let the parents, the schools, and the school board take care of our schools. I think we can do much better. Not that it's perfect. There's problems in Kansas on that, but at the end of the day, we're going to make better decisions closer to home than they will ever make in Washington, D.C.
You know, I think government brings us a lot of complicated questions, Tim, that if you and I were sitting at the co-op in either Abilene or Fowler, this would be a lot easier conversation. Our answers to how to fix it would come very quickly because they're very common sense and they're very easy. What makes it hard is putting it through the layer of governance as the federal government has become. So, you know, that's your job you do for us. So as you go back up there and you face these challenges again, you going to change your game or you're on the game you like?
Well, you've got to have principles. And there are things to compromise on. You can say, hey, we're either going to spend $1 million or they want to spend $2 million. You say, okay, we can compromise at $1.5 million. But if you're going to go after my Second Amendment rights, there is no compromise. We're going to take on this president. So we saw on the floor of the House just a few weeks ago, people laying down, just laying there and saying, hey, we're not going to move until you take away our right to purchase a gun. And no. You know, issues of life. No, I'm not going to compromise away principles. But that's the thing. This system is about people actually standing up for what they believe. And I respect the other side if they're going to stand up for what they believe. But what I found problematic is when Republicans campaign as conservatives and then they go to Washington and do something else. And that's why I think people are so frustrated. They think in a way they're looking at $20 trillion of debt, looking at an economy that's been flat for 7 years, the longest non-recovery period, I think, in our nation's history. And I think it has to do with too many regulations, too much control. I hear from small businesses in agriculture and elsewhere, well, Tim, we don't want to take any more chances because we think the government's going to walk in the door tomorrow and take everything we ever. I talked to a guy last night in Manhattan, Kansas. He said, I've got a great idea. I've got a patent on it. I think it'll do great. But I'm afraid as soon as I start it and mortgage my home for it, the government's going to show up and take it all away. And that is a real fear and threat. And it's, you know, entrepreneurs are worried and scared about what this administration or any bureaucrat's going to do to them in Washington.
Well, Tim, we're at the end of our time. I want to say to you as a person, I keep up with what you're doing in Washington all the time. I keep up with all of our Kansas representatives. We pay their check and they go up there and work for us. I don't think I've ever found anything that you do there that you didn't say to me here. And which is the question, are you still staying on your game? And your answer was, I'm a principled person. You don't have any choice but to stay on your game. So I thank you for being transparent about that, being willing to always sit down with me on camera and be a principal person.
Yeah.
People get to choose, don't they?
It is. It's a representative republic, and they deserve to know what the representative is doing. You know,
Yeah.
that's why it's 372 town halls. You know, that's why. Also, why I will say that's why I get on a plane every week and return home. You know, my home is in Kansas, not in Washington, and no Washington insider that I know of gets their daily ag markets on their phone twice a day. What are the prices? You go into my office in D.C., if you've ever been in, the first thing you open up the door, you see the prices from the Dodge City Co-op. We update those every day to keep in mind that at the end of the day, agriculture is the number one industry in the district, and that's where I come from. So again, just an amazing opportunity. But we have so many challenges to solve, but Americans has tougher times. We've had Dwight D. Eisenhower looking over at the Nazis over there controlling all of Europe and said, can we beat him? He didn't know. But I do know now we can defeat these threats to our economy, threats to our liberty, and restore what is, we think, the greatest dream in history of the world, the American dream.
I like to say, we'll end on this. Thank you, and thank you for giving me a segue to end on Eisenhower. The man who gave the world a second chance at freedom. We have his example. We have all of his records. We have his life in Abilene, Kansas. We have a leader. We have people willing to lead today. These problems are solvable. Thanks for coming to talk to me.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Folks, we know you enjoyed today's program of Our Town. We know you'll go out and do your very best to make our town a great place to live and work. I'm Dennis Sweets for Eagle Communications. Tim Huelskamp. Have a great day.